Good evening and welcome to Countryside Community Church. We are so glad that you have joined us tonight for Nasty Women, a celebration of the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. About a year ago, I discovered two CDs by Dr. Joanna Goldstein, who's our special guest this evening. And I thought, wow, what a great way to commemorate the 100th anniversary, to bring Dr. Goldstein to Omaha to play some of this music and explain it to us. Well, COVID-19 had other plans, but suffice it to say, I am very grateful that Dr. Goldstein's been willing to join us tonight to share some context and explore this music with us. We're going to take a journey through some unique, innovative, and remarkable unsung masterworks by some really extraordinary women. In the description below, you'll find links to purchase Dr. Joanna Goldstein's CDs if you are so interested. There's also program notes containing lyrics, biographical sketches, and other information for you to peruse, as well as a link if you are interested in supporting Countryside's effort to do more of these important concerts. You can click the link below, and any amount, large or small, is certainly appreciated and will help us provide free concerts of timely and relevant topics. So we thank you for your support. We thank you for watching tonight. Please enjoy the show. And now I present Dr. Joanna Goldstein, Professor of Music at Indiana University Southeast, to tell us kind of what inspired her to get into this music and dig a little bit deeper.
I became very intrigued not only by the history of this particular time, but also by the music, because it is a real, it's a real node in stylistic periods. It's a real era of change. On the one hand, you have composers that were writing romantic music, and then you have post-romantic music, and then you have composers who are inspired by jazz. And then you have composers who are really forward-looking, like Marion Bauer, really forward-looking to more contemporary 12-tone and serialism and all of this. So it's a musical period that has incredible diversity. And of course, you can't forget what was going on politically at the time, because of course, women were looking for a political voice from the mid to late 1800s. And it took a very, very, very long time for suffrage in any of the world. England got there a little earlier, as did Australia than we did. But of course, 1920, 1925 was a very, very important period for women finding their voice. And so this seemed like a way of bringing together women finding their musical voice at the same time as women finding their political voice.
estranged, the wind has dropped and the sky's deranged. Summer has stopped. Summer has stopped. And the world has changed. Look in my eyes, wilt thou change too? Look in my eyes, wilt thou change too? Should I fear surprise? Shall I find out new in the old and dear, in the good and true, in the changing year? Look in my eyes. Look in my eyes. Wilt thou change too? The years at the spring and days at the moon, mornings at 7, the hillsides dew bloom. The years at the spring and days at the moon, the larks on the wing, the snails on the thorn, God's in his hand, God's in his hand, oh,
Women, of course, were always, there were always performers, because women were encouraged to take up the clavichord, the harpsichord, and the piano. It was part of being a well-educated, cultured woman, and some of them, though not many, continued on into the professional world, like Clara Schumann, but of course, she came from a musical family. But women as composers were a much rarer breed and not really very respected. People used to critique composers as, oh, that's a woman composer, or that's a very masculine composer. And, there's even, I'll paraphrase this, there was even a quote that I ran across from Aaron Copland that was something on there, this is an exact quote, but what is it about women that they can't be creative in music, which I just thought is, it's rather hysterical and rather sad. And so Ethel Smythe, that symposium inspired me to look further, and being someone who works at a university, I had the very good fortune to get a sabbatical, which is very nice because it gives you opportunities to do some research. And I was surfing the net at the Library of Congress. And what I came up with, I even have it here, this is a photocopy of a page in the Musical Courier, which was a journal or a newspaper, from 1925 that talked about the first concert celebrating American women composers. It was 1925, April 28th through the 30th in Washington, D.C. And it was 3 days of, they had 15 composers, and it was a mixture of chamber music and vocal works and piano works and works for band and for orchestra and things like that. And it just fascinated me. Yeah, she's a very, very interesting character because not only was she a very prolific composer, but she was in the middle of all kinds of political changes and literary changes. She was a good friend of Virginia Woolf. She met composer Tchaikovsky, Dvorak, Clara Schumann, Brahms when she was in Leipzig. So she was a very, very colorful character, and she was also very much involved with Pankhurst in the suffragette movement in England, to the point where she was imprisoned briefly, which is where the March of the Women comes up, that I know you're going to have on your concert. She did conduct the March of the Women with a toothbrush. That's very true. Ethel Smythe did her own thing. And I think that Ethel Smythe would have done her own thing with or without the suffrage movement. I mean, she insisted on being a composer. Her father didn't particularly want her to do that. And she pestered him till he said, yes, you could go to Leipzig. And she made her way as a very young woman, which, I mean, it's very surprising in that period of time. Here she was, she picked herself up and went off to Leipzig and made a life for a period of time there before she came back. I think she just pursued what she wanted to pursue, musically and intellectually. And of course, by getting hooked up with Virginia Woolf, there was that whole thought of women needing their own space to be able to create. You know, part of this women going off on their own is that, as Virginia Woolf says, if you're always living in the living room, you have no private space to think, you don't have your own. It's not only about the house and the apartment, but if you're always at everybody else's beck and call, you can't develop your own voice. You have to have a room of your own to be able to do this. And to me, that room of your own is a much larger thing than just, you know, talking about a room in a house.
There was once a poor clown all dressed in white and chained to the dungeon bars, and he danced all day and he danced all night to the sound of the dancing stars. Oh, clown, silly clown, oh, why do you dance? You know you can never be free. You are tied by the leg to the strings of chance, yet you dance like a captive flea. My chain is heavy, my cell is dark. I know I can never be free. In my heart, there's a dancing spark, and the stars make music for me. Oh, muffle my sail and rivet my chain, and fetter my feet and my hands. My soul is a horse of foam without reins, that dances under the sands.
if you look at some of the composers, maybe a little earlier, late 19th century, character pieces for the piano were very, very common. It might come from the fact that, well, first of all, a lot of these pieces are influenced by nature. You know, gnomes, flowers, dragonflies, you know, things like that. And they were almost little vignettes of the world around them. These pieces are very good for playing in the home, playing in small halls, not necessarily, you know, your large concert hall that has 1,000 people in, although you certainly can. They're more intimate. What I wanted to do, a great deal of the music that I found for piano were miniatures, character pieces, short things. And that's what I did in the first all piano, solo piano CD. And then I thought, you know, I want to reflect the full scope of what some of these composers did. Now, I, you know, don't have I have an orchestra that I conduct, but not a professional orchestra. So I thought chamber music was the next best bet to show works that were bigger in scope. And so the second CD I did are two trios and a violin sonata, so that I could show some of these composers with larger scoped works. You have to be careful with the title of my first one. The solo album, I have it right here, as a matter of fact, is Nasty Women. And you have to be careful, because if you look online, you have to say Nasty Women CD, because otherwise you get some very unfortunate websites. But what that means is women that in a sense didn't know the place they were supposed to have and went beyond it. And it was the same thing with the chamber one. They persisted. They didn't have it easy. They didn't have it easy. Some of them, a lot of them taught. Some of them were professional performers. One composer, Ulrich Kohl, who started out as a pianist and was a composer, was a fellow alum, I can say, from Juilliard, a New Yorker. She finally gave up and she became an editor for Time magazine. You know, so things were not easy for these women, for these composers. And I thought, you know, we were also in the middle of people sometimes not saying very nice things about women in power. And so it's really a shame that society cannot honor people for their skills, for their talents, regardless of who they are. I mean, it really does not reflect strength and confidence. When you think about it, if somebody like Mahler or Aaron Copland, these were famous people, excellent composers, what do they have to be concerned about? You know, they have excellent reputations that are not going to suffer by any kind of competition. In fact, competition is good. It makes us better. instance, if you talk about somebody like Florence Price, the piece that I have on my CD, Rhapsody Negra, it has basically its variations on a couple of gospel tunes. But there is one section in there that very, very, very clearly sounds like a train, as in the slave trade and the trains that brought the slaves north. And so I think that people, I think it was not overt, but I think that composers who were interested in making a statement did it like that. Of course, there were styles of music that were jazz was subversive. So anybody who included some sort of jazz in their writing, to a certain extent, was being at least artistically subversive to a certain degree. Amy Beach is probably the most well-known of all of these women. And she was a big supporter of American music and of women composers. And she, along with Gina Branscombe, who was originally Canadian, moved to the United States, and they developed the Society of American Women Composers, which eventually, it lasted for many, many, many years and eventually morphed into the International Composers Society. So, and she was also very much involved with the MacDowells, with the MacDowell Foundation. And in fact, as far as I know, gave all her royalties, she wrote about 300 pieces, gave all her royalties to the MacDowell Society. And of course, a lot of composers, and many of these women composers and many others spent many summers and periods of time at the MacDowell colony, where it gave them time to compose. There's an example of having a room of your own. You know, they had time to do that. So, you know, she of course started out as a pianist, but then eventually did more and more in the area of composition, and very, very well respected. I think she's pretty much considered the first, you know, really major American composer, not just woman composer or for piano. The Gaelic Symphony. I happen to conduct the University Orchestra where I teach, and we did the Gaelic Symphony last year. It's a big, rich piece. It's major work. So she had a lot of variety in her composition. Yeah, she was a violist, English, British American. So she eventually moved over here. But I think I read that she was one of the first women in a major symphony as a violist. But I love the trio. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece, and it is a unique tonal language. You know, and there's an example. You have somebody like Clark or Marion Bauer, who was much more way out there actually with quartal harmonies and serialism. At the same time that you have Ulrich Kohl and Dana Suisse writing jazz influenced pieces, at the same time that you have people writing very romantic works, either for voice or piano or whatever. It's just the mixture of that period is just fascinating. To be honest with you, one of the reasons I did the second CD is because the first CD, by its nature, were those character pieces. And I did it for two reasons. First of all, that's mostly what I found, although there were some larger works. Secondly, because of what I was trying to do, I wanted to get as many composers as possible on this CD. And the CD has a certain length. You can't go beyond about 70 minutes. But I intentionally did the second one because I was sensitive to the fact that people might think, oh, these sweet character pieces, I guess that's what women did. That's what they wrote. And my point was, no, they wrote everything. They did that, but they did the massive works. They did the Gaelic Symphony. They did operas like the Wreckers. They did the Rebecca Clark Trio. They did the Ethel Smythe piece that I have on my CD. I did as a trio, but it was originally written by her as a violin horn concerto. And then 1 year later, she arranged it as a piano, as a trio. And they're big, big pieces. And I think if Rebecca Clark, and I agree with you, it's very, very strong music, which I love. I think Ethel Smythe has the same kind of aesthetic, and so does Amy Beach in her symphony. You know, and there's an example. Listen to a piano piece, which can be quite impressionistic, and maybe one would think of it as, you know, feminine, very impressionistic, and then compare that to her Gaelic Symphony, which is a powerful work. So they did everything. I think the other thing is, music is an extremely conservative profession. I mean, gosh, orchestras are still playing in tailcoats. That comes from the early 20th century. We're very, very, think about how musicians are trained. Musicians are trained in a kind of apprenticeship, situation. So it's a very, very conservative profession. And, I know when I was in school, and we were going through and we had to learn music from all the different periods of music. And my teacher said, we were talking about the 20th century. He said, well, why don't you do Rachmaninoff? I said, really, you're kidding. Rachmaninoff, yes, it's technically 20th century, but it isn't really new music. So what happens is the training in conservatories and colleges, you think about what performers are trained to do. We all do the Bach and the Beethoven, the Chopin and the Mozart and the Mendelssohn and all that kind of stuff. And it's all valuable, great, wonderful music. But what it sometimes does, I think, is cut out opportunities to find new things. And I'll just go back a little bit to a question you asked me at first, what inspired me to do this. Part of what inspired me is what I said originally. The other thing that inspired me was how many more Chopin etudes do people have to hear? There are people out in the world doing lots of Beethoven, doing lots of Chopin, doing lots of Brahms. There are not so many people doing some of this music that's not being heard.
Night comes, a Madonna, clad in scented blue. Rose red her mouth, and deep her eyes. She lights her stars, and turns to where believers sing the
In order for this music to live, people like the people who are playing in your concert, people like me, we have to keep looking for it and keep finding it and keep performing it. A lot of times, women will tell you that in order to get ahead, they just have to work twice as hard. They have to try twice as hard because nobody really opens the door for them. I hope that what you're doing and what I did and what other people are doing will inspire generations of people to keep investigating and keep finding this stuff, because it's in libraries. It's there. We can find it. But I think that if we do that, there is a whole collection of really good music that has yet to be discovered.